What's up guys? Zebra here coming at you with a Diablo 4 build guide video. Started theory crafting a couple of rogue builds since I'm going to main rogue in Diablo 4 and will most likely end up making multiple rogues for different activities. In this one, we'll be looking at a Twisting Blades build tailored for boss farming. The link to the build planner will be in the description. So first of all, Twisting Blades might get nuked because it's very strong. I'll be making other builds just in case it ends up not being good enough to main, so stay tuned for those in the near future. So as mentioned previously, this is a build focused on boss farming, so as much single target DPS as possible. The build will still work for dungeon and AoE farming, but definitely not optimized for those purposes. A lot of info is missing, so I might change a lot of stuff once the game releases and I get more information. The build might need more survivability as well if there is more inevitable damage than anticipated from bosses. Alright, pros and cons. Well, pros is almost everything. High damage and mobility, efficient at farming, and very fun to play. I guess the only con is really your melee might be squishy, depending if you can dodge mechanics well. Let's start with the specialization. Depending on the boss, this build will either use Inner Sight or Preparation. If not changed, Inner Sight's gauge fills very quickly when the boss is the only target in the area. But for bosses that would spawn a lot of adds, I would use Preparation instead for the cooldown reduction shenanigans. The basic skill of choice here is Puncture with the fundamental node for vulnerability. We won't use Puncture all that much if we're spamming Twisting Blades while Inner Sight is up, but it's very good to shoot from range while closing in on targets to get vulnerable applied if Shadow Imbuement is on CD. The core skill of course is maxed Twisting Blades with the advanced node for insane cooldown reduction. This node is so overpowered. If I was Blizzard, I would change it to reduce cooldowns by only 1 second, and if the blade hits at least 3 targets. I think that would make it much more balanced. We also put 1 point in Sturdy and 1 point in Siphoning Strike passives for a little bit of DR and Life Leech from crits for dire situations without potions. In the Agility section, we put 1 point into Shadow Step and 1 point into Dash with its Enhanced node. Shadow Step will only be used to travel to the boss. We switch the skill on the bar for Shadow Clone once we get to the boss area for the fight. We also put 3 points into the Weapon Mastery passive. This is a pretty strong passive, giving us a pretty good damage boost. No active skill in the Subterfuge section, but we take a few passives. 3 points into Agile, which will give us more dodge chance when we use cooldowns. This synergizes well with Paragon powers that increase our damage when we dodge. We also put 3 points in Exploit and Malice passives for more damage to healthy enemies and vulnerable enemies. This build uses both Shadow and Poison Imbuements. We can't use both at the same time as they will override each other, so we have to use one, attack twice, use the other imbuement, attack twice, and then our first imbuement should be off cooldown soon after that, and we can continue to chain them. So we max Shadow Imbuement and get the blended node for vulnerability. This gives us good vulnerability uptime on the boss without needing to use Puncture too often. We max Poison Imbuement and get the blended node for more crit strike damage from poison attacks. We put 3 points in the Precision Imbuement passive for crit chance on imbuements and 3 points in Deadly Venom for more poison damage. For the ultimate, we use Shadow Clone with both the Prime and Supreme nodes. It's pretty good for bosses and we can reset the cooldown pretty efficiently. For the passives in this section, we put 1 point into Innervation and we max both Second Wind and Alchemist's Fortune for more lucky hit chance, which will synergize very well with the key passive choice. The key passive is Victimize. Twisting Blades and Imbuements have fairly high lucky hit chance of 33%, so Victimize should proc very often, and with the way snapshotting works in this game, proc might do some very dirty things. Moving on to the Paragon Boards. This might be way more complicated than we initially anticipated. We'll have to see if getting the bonus from the rare nodes we get early is better than getting other rare nodes. So I say it again, some of this might change as we make it to endgame and get more information. In the starting board we get the Prime and Resilience rare nodes for more damage, life, and res. We use the chip glyph on this board to boost our physical damage by a ton, and grab all the dex nodes and radius for bonus damage. We then grab more damage nodes and exit up top to the next board. Again, the order of the boards and the points we put in them will depend on a lot of things, so don't mind the order of the boards here. This one is the No Witness board. We flip it around to be connected between the Ruin and Knowledge rare nodes. We'll make our way to the Legendary Power first. This power will give a big damage boost to Shadow Clone, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be easy to have a 100% uptime on that 10% damage buff with the cooldown reduction from all those Twisting Blade hits. We get the Recuperate rare node and a couple of magic nodes for more potion healing, and make our way to the glyph socket. We take the Rune rare power with all its magic nodes around for its damage to healthy enemies and critical strike damage. The glyph we would use here is Closer. This gives us 10% DR while using melee weapons, and will give a good damage boost to our cutthroat skills with every dex nodes we get in the radius of the glyph. We also take the Training and Knowledge rare nodes and a couple of magic nodes around them for more damage in life. We exit right from here, and we move on to the next board, which is Exploit Weakness. We flip it around to be connected in between the Exploit and Dosage rare nodes. On this board we'll be using the Turf glyph. This gives us more DR against close enemies, and gives us a good damage boost to close enemies with all strength nodes taken in the glyph's radius. We get the Artifice rare power with all magic nodes around it for more damage to vulnerable enemies and strength. We then go towards the Legendary node, getting the Hunter Killer rare node for more damage to elites. The Exploit Witness Legendary node gives us a good damage boost, stacking up to 15% when hitting a vulnerable enemy. This buff will have very close to 100% uptime during bosses. After that, we go back and get the Exploit rare node for more damage to vulnerable and injured enemies. We then exit this board upwards and take Laerana's Instinct as our last board. This last board's legendary power will only work with Inner Sight, but I suspect I will be using Inner Sight most of the time on this build. The other powers you get here are still pretty good even without Inner Sight though. So we connect in between the glyph socket and the Discerning rare node. We use the combat glyph on this board for core skill damage and energy efficiency on critical strikes. This will help us a lot on bosses with a lot of adds where Inner Sight won't be as good. We get both Feint and Tolerance rare nodes for damage after dodging and some res. Working towards a legendary power, we get the Nimble and Suffused rare nodes for attack speed, damage, all res, and dot damage reduction. This board's legendary power might be really OP if Inner Sight and Twisting Blade stay the same. As it stands right now, the Inner Sight gauge fills up really fast, so we would be getting this 100% dodge effect quite often. Let's wait and see what happens on release though. With the rest of the points, we get the Discerning rare node for more damage to elites and damage after dodging. Lastly, the items. I've done some research and tried to find what affixes can roll per slot, but the information doesn't seem to be available. We currently have no information what we can enchant in-game, so it's very difficult to theory craft this item build. I'll be using the information I have, so here again, a lot of this might change once the game comes out. This is a very damage-oriented build. I might end up targeting more dodge, armor, life, or DR if the survivability is needed for boss farming. I'm assuming we're using legendaries or uniques here, so there will be a fourth affix, but getting 3 of those on a rare would work too, until we find a legendary to replace it. Starting with the helmet, Shaco would of course be the ideal choice here. For all skills, DR, life, cooldown reduction, resource regeneration, and all stats. This helm is insane, and if I find it early, I'm gonna scream like an absolute nerd. If we don't get our hands on a Shaco, we can use a helm with the Disobedience legendary power. It's pretty good to stack armor while attacking for more DR. Didn't find a helmet with an implicit affix, so let's assume there's none for now. We target skills to both Shadow and Poison imbuements. I'm not sure if +4 is the max here, but let's pretend it is. Some Poison res and dex. The res can be different here. It all depends what you can get on other pieces, but from what I heard, maxing res will be pretty important. The chest piece would use the Exploiter legendary power. From the information I could gather, bosses are considered unstoppable while they are not staggered, so this power is huge boost to damage. No implicit on chests either from what I could see. Ideal stats would be Cutthroat skill damage, physical damage, damage, and fire res. Again, the res could be different or something else if not needed. I find it pretty crazy that you can have 3 offensive affixes on chest piece. We might even be able to have 4. We'll just have to wait and see. Gloves would use the Accelerating power. This gives us a buff to attack speed on core skill critical strikes. It's a pretty substantial boost to our DPS. The stats should be +4 or more to Twisting Blades, along with critical strike hit chance, increased attack speed, and dexterity. Focusing on damage with the gloves because they can roll pretty good offensive stats. Pants would use the Protector power. This is pretty much a must-have on any boss killer. The barrier we get here is pretty big, and it'll help us tank some hits if we make mistakes and if there's inevitable damage. It will also synergize with one of the powers we get on our ring for a damage boost while a barrier is active. Note that the implicit on pants will also proc a barrier when we use a potion while injured. The ideal affixes would be DR from close enemies, DR, all res, and dex. I don't know if many offensive affixes can roll on pants other than subterfuge skills, which we don't use here. Boots would use the eluding power. This one can save us when we get injured while crowd controlled. It gives you the unstoppable buff to let you get out of a potential death. The implicit on the boots would be evade cooldown reduction from attacks. This lets us have evade way more often, and I feel it's overall better than having another evade charge. The ideal affixes would be tri-res depending on which ones you need, and movement speed. More movement speed equals more loot per hour, as simple as that, but it can be replaced with something else if needed. For the amulet, the power would be Edgemaster. This power gives us a big damage boost based on resources. This power is pretty insane combined with Inner Sight, and by having it on the amulet, we get a 50% increase effectiveness on the power. The implicit should be all res if needed to cap our res. The ideal affixes would be 4 or more imbuement skills, cutthroat skill damage, and movement speed. Again, movement speed is replaceable. Ring 1 would use a conceited power. This is the one that gives a damage boost while a barrier is active. The implicit would be whichever dual res you need. The affixes would be damage to close enemies, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, and damage. Ring 2 would use the intercom power. This power gives us a damage boost while standing still. Some bosses will have windows where we can just spam our attacks without needing to move, allowing us to ramp up our damage quite substantially. The implicits would still be dual res of need, and the ideal affixes would be the same as our other ring. The ranged weapon of choice would be the crossbow for its vulnerable damage implicit. The damage to distant enemies on bows would be of no use to us. The legendary power on the crossbow would of course be Blade Dancer for the boosted damage and Whirling Blades mechanic for our core skill, Twisting Blades. The ideal affixes would be damage to close enemies, core skill damage, critical strike damage, and dexterity. We could replace dexterity with critical strike chance if we get in on weapons, but I haven't been able to find an example of a crossbow with crit strike chance on it. We use 2 swords for the critical strike damage implicit and the percentage damage boost from our weapon mastery passive. The power on the first sword would be the corruption power. This boosts our imbuement potency, which is pretty good. The legendary power on the second sword would be smiting. This gives us more critical hit chance versus injured enemies, helping us with the last 25% HP of the boss. Both swords would have the same affixes as a crossbow. So there you have it, the Twisting Blades boss killer rogue. I can't wait to have more info and update this build, as I feel a lot of changes will come with the full release of the game. If you want to keep up with the changes to the build, check the link to the planner from time to time, as I will keep it updated. I'll be making more rogue builds and might do more classes as I get more experience with them. I only pushed rogue in the beta, so I'm not comfortable recommending anything for other classes yet. I would appreciate a sub and a like if you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments how I could improve this build. I'd love to learn from y'all. I'm currently streaming Project Diablo 2, but we'll be streaming Diablo 4 from release on my Twitch. The link will be in the description, so you can come and give me a follow if you don't want to miss the next stream. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see you in the next one.